I don't exist on LinkedIn. If you Google my name, you'll find a florist in Topeka and a dead woman in Idaho, and that's exactly how the Department of Defense likes it. My office is a windowless box inside a SIF, sensitive compartmented information facility, buried deep within the bowels of a generic glass building in Maryland that houses one of the biggest defense contractors on the East Coast. To the outside world, I'm a mid-level manager pushing paper. To the Pentagon, I am the named security officer, NSO, holding the keys to the kingdom for a Tier 1 special access program. That means if a paperclip moves without my authorization, treason charges are theoretically on the table. I thrive on rules. Rules are the only thing separating civilization from the kind of chaos that ends with a congressional hearing and a sudden urge to move to a non-extradition country. So when I walked into the office that Tuesday, 7 months pregnant and carrying a bladder the size of a walnut, I noticed the vibe was off immediately. The air tasted like stale Dunkin' Donuts coffee and impending incompetence. Before I get into how I single-handedly dismantled a $400 million revenue stream using nothing but a federal handbook and pure spite, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and maybe drop a like. Your support is the only thing keeping my team from developing a drinking problem. Anyway, back to the grime. My desk was spotless, aligned with the same precision I used to audit our safe logs. But Brad, our program director, was leaning against my doorframe. Brad is the kind of guy who thinks synergy is a personality trait and wears loafers without socks because he saw it in a GQ spread in 2014. He's a suit, a specialized breed of corporate parasite who sells promises to the government that he expects people like me to fulfill. He looked at me, then at my stomach, then back at my face with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It just kind of stretched his face skin like cheap plastic wrap. Karen, the oracle of the SIF, Brad boomed, his voice echoing off the soundproofed walls. We're gearing up for the big audit next month. The $400 million, baby. The white whale. It's a routine DCSA review, Brad, I said, logging into my workstation. My password was 24 characters long and changed every week, and it's only a whale if we're hiding blubber. Everything is green across the board. I checked the SF-86s last night. Right, you're a machine, he laughed, but it was dry, like coughing up dust. Listen, with your situation. He gestured vaguely toward my midsection as if I were smuggling a bomb rather than a human child. Corporate is worried about the operational tempo. This contract is the lifeblood of the division. If we fumble the handoff while you're on, you know, mommy time, we're cooked. I stopped typing. The cursor blinked at me, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. Mommy time. You mean the federally mandated medical leave I'm entitled to after working 80-hour weeks for 5 years to keep your clearance active? Semantics, Care Bear, he said. He actually called me Care Bear. I mentally visualized a drone strike on his Acura. We just need to be agile, flexible, I was thinking. Maybe we start offloading some of your signatory duties early. To Jason. I looked over at Jason's desk. Jason was a 24-year-old associate whose primary skill set involved making TikToks in the break room and forgetting to lock his secure terminal. Jason couldn't get a clearance to clean a toilet at the NSA, let alone sign off on top-secret architectural diagrams. Jason doesn't have the adjudication status, Brad, I said, my voice dropping to that icy register that usually makes grown men check their zippers. He's not the NSO. I am. Pentagon auditor looks for my signature. If they see Jason's chicken scratch on a document for a weapon system, we don't just lose the contract. We go to jail. Well, I don't, you might. Brad's smile vanished. The plastic wrap snapped. You're too rigid, Karen. That's always been your problem. You think the rules are the mission. The mission is the mission. We need team players, not gatekeepers. Just think about how we can smooth this over. You don't want your condition to be a liability. My condition. He said it like I had leprosy. I turned my chair to face him fully. My pregnancy isn't a liability, Brad. It's a biological function. The liability is you trying to bypass a Directive 5220.22m protocol because you're too lazy to file the interim paperwork. I will prepare the handover properly. I will brief the temporary FSO, but I am not giving Jason my tokens, and I am not falsifying the signatory logs. Brad stared at me for a long beat. In that silence, I heard the hum of the servers and the distant sound of my career being put into a shredder. He didn't scream. He didn't argue. He just nodded, a slow, predatory movement. Okay, Karen, do it your way. Just make sure the paperwork is ready. He walked away, leaving a scent of expensive cologne and moral decay. I put my hand on my stomach. The baby kicked, a sharp thud against my ribs. Don't worry, kid, I thought. Mommy isn't going to let the bad man win. But as I looked at my monitors, usually a comforting wall of green status bars and locked files, I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. My access to the shared HR drive, the one where I kept my leave request forms, was grayed out. Just a glitch, probably. IT was always messing things up. But in the world of high-stakes defense contracting, there are no coincidences. There are only vectors of attack, and I had just shown Brad my flank. I spent the rest of the day doing what I do best, digging in. I didn't just do my work, I audited it. I created a shadow log of every email, every interaction, every time Brad looked at me with that calculation in his eyes. I was the named security officer. I was the firewall. What I didn't realize was that the malware was already inside the building, and it had a corner office. The following week, the atmosphere in the office shifted from passive-aggressive to Soviet-era surveillance state. It wasn't anything you could take to HR immediately, it was the silence. When I walked into the break room, conversations died. When I sent emails to the proposal team asking for the updated schematics for the audit, I got red receipts but no replies. I was being ghosted by my own coworkers, people whose clearances I had personally adjudicated. I sat in my ergonomic chair, which was currently the only thing in the building supporting me, and reviewed the DCSA, Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency preparation checklist. The audit was 3 weeks away. I was due in 5. The timing was tight, but I had a plan. I always had a plan. Then came the friendly check-in. Outlook pinged. Calendar invite from Brad. Subject, op sync/transition strategy. Location, his office. No agenda attached. In the corporate world, a meeting without an agenda is an ambush. I waddled down the hallway, yes, waddled, my ankles were the size of grapefruits, clutching my notebook. I never went anywhere without a physical notebook. Digital notes can be deleted by an admin with a grudge. Ink is forever. Brad wasn't alone. Sitting next to him was Sheila from HR, a woman whose smile was so tight I worried if she sneezed her face would shatter. Sheila was the kind of HR rep who protected the company from the employees, not the other way around. Karen, have a seat, Brad said, gesturing to the low chair that was impossible for a pregnant woman to get out of gracefully. I remained standing. I'm good, thanks. My back prefers verticality. What's up? We're just concerned, Sheila chimed in, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. Brad mentioned you seem a bit overwhelmed. With the audit coming up and your due date, we want to make sure the company isn't putting too much strain on you. I'm not overwhelmed, I said, keeping my tone flat. I'm on schedule. The binders are 90% prep. See, that's the thing, Brad interrupted, leaning forward. 90% isn't 100. And if you go into labor early, we're left holding the bag. You need to transfer the NSO credentials. Today, I felt the temperature in the room drop. Transfer to whom? We haven't hired a qualified replacement yet. The background check on the temp hasn't even cleared the preliminary phase. To me, Brad said. He smiled and I saw the wolf teeth. I'll hold the NSO designation until you get back. I almost laughed. Brad, you have a secret clearance. The contract requires top secret with PSI eligibility. You literally cannot be the NSO. The system won't even let me input your name. It's a violation of federal law. If I give you my tokens, we are both committing a felony. Brad slammed his hand on the desk. It was a calculated outburst, meant to startle me into submission. I run this program, Karen. I don't need a lecture on federal law from someone who's about to be out of the office for 3 months pumping breast milk. You have a $400 million review. If that auditor asks for a file and I can't open it because you're in a delivery room, we lose. Then you better hope I don't go into labor, I said, my voice shaking slightly, not from fear but from the adrenaline dumping into my system. Because I am not giving you my SIPRnet token. That is a hard no, it's non-negotiable. Sheila cleared her throat. Karen, refusal to follow a direct order from leadership can be grounds for performance review. Refusal to commit a crime is grounds for a whistleblower complaint, Sheila. I shot back. Do you want me to document this conversation as a formal request to violate the National Industrial Security Program Operating Manual? Because I can write that memo right now. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. Brad's face turned a shade of red usually reserved for botched launch codes. Sheila looked at her notebook, refusing to meet my eyes. Fine, Brad spat. Get back to work. But we're going to need to figure out a workaround. You're becoming a bottleneck. I'm the safety valve, Brad. There's a difference. I walked out. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew I had won the battle, but the war had just gone nuclear. I went back to my desk and immediately tried to log into the main server to back up my email correspondence regarding the refusal. Access denied. My stomach dropped. Not the baby this time. Fear. I tried my secondary login. Account suspended. Contact administrator. I looked across the room. Jason was watching me, nervously spinning a pen. He quickly looked away when I caught his eye. They were cutting my lines. They were isolating me. I didn't call IT. I knew Brad had already made that call. Instead, I opened my physical safe, the one only I had the combination to, and took out the hard copy logs of every access request, every audit trail, and every clearance grant for the last 6 months. I shoved them into my oversized tote bag, underneath the prenatal vitamins and the emergency granola bars. If they were going to lock me out, I was going to make sure I took the keys with me. I spent the rest of the afternoon manually transcribing the timestamps from my local machine's event viewer into my notebook. I wrote until my hand cramped. At 4:55 p.m., an email popped up on my phone since my computer was now a brick. It was from Sheila. Subject, employment status update. I didn't open it immediately. I knew what it was. I looked around the office at the gray cubicles, the posters about integrity and vigilance, and I felt a cold, hard resolve settle over me. They thought they were cutting off a loose end. They didn't realize they were pulling the pin on a grenade. I opened the email. It was short, written in that bloodless corporate dialect that HR people learn in a specialized circle of hell. Dear Karen, effective immediately, your employment with Redacted Defense Corp is terminated. This decision is based on the operational incompatibility of your upcoming leave availability with the critical needs of the Program Management Office. Please surrender your badge and company devices to security upon exit. Operational incompatibility. That was a new one. It was a fancy way of saying, you're pregnant, you're inconvenient, and we found a way to phrase it that we think will hold up in court. I didn't cry. Crying is for people who don't have a backup plan. In the defense industry, if you're crying, you're already dead. I had expected this, maybe not this fast, but I knew Brad. He was a cornered animal and cornered animals bite. He needed to get me out of the way before the audit so he could fake his way through it with Jason or some other puppet. He couldn't do that while I was physically sitting there guarding the logs. I stood up. My lower back screamed, a dull ache that radiated down my legs. I ignored it. I had about 10 minutes before security, actual uniformed guards, not the clowns in the office, came to escort me out. I grabbed my tote bag. I had the hard logs. I had my notebook. But I needed one last thing. I needed the digital fingerprint of their stupidity. My workstation was locked out, but the SIF had a dedicated printer with a local memory cache for classified document handling. It wasn't networked in the traditional sense, to prevent remote hacking. If anyone had printed the offboarding documents or the internal memos regarding my status, it might still be in the localized queue history. I walked over to the printer. Jason looked up. Karen, you okay? Just clearing the queue, Jason. Standard hygiene, I lied, my voice steady. I accessed the admin menu, print history. There it was. Document titled Justification Memo NSO Replacement DocX, printed by Brad 2 hours ago. I hit reprint. The machine whirred. I prayed the noise wouldn't attract Brad. A single page slid out. I snatched it. It wasn't just a justification, it was a smoking gun. It detailed a plan to temporarily bridge the NSO role using a shared credential approach until a permanent hire could be found post-audit. Brad had written down his intent to commit federal security fraud on company letterhead. I folded the paper and shoved it into my bra. It was the only place they wouldn't search. 2 minutes later, the door opened. 2 security guards, big guys, usually friendly, now looking at their boots, walked in. Brad stood behind them looking smug. Karen, Brad said, stepping into the room like he owned it. HR sent the notice. We need your badge. I saw it, I said. I picked up my bag. You're firing a protected class employee 3 weeks before a federal audit. Bold strategy, Brad. It's not a firing. It's a restructuring of resources, he smirked. And since you're no longer read-on to the program, you need to leave the SIF immediately. You are now an unauthorized person in a secure area. He was enjoying this. He was getting off on the power trip. He thought he had stripped me naked. I unclipped my badge, one that identified me as the gatekeeper of their secrets. I tossed it onto his desk. It clattered loudly. Good luck with the audit, Brad. Remember, the DCSA auditor checks the wet signatures against the digital timestamps. But you know that, right? His eye twitched. Just a fraction. Get her out of here. The walk to the elevator was the longest of my life. I could feel the eyes of my former team on me. Some looked pitying, others relieved it wasn't them. I kept my head high, one hand on my belly, the other gripping my bag so tight my knuckles were white. They escorted me to the lobby. They took my company phone. They took my laptop. They left me standing on the sidewalk in the humid Maryland air, surrounded by the smell of exhaust and impending rain. My Uber arrived 5 minutes later. As I sat in the back of a Toyota Camry that smelled like vanilla air freshener and old fast food, I didn't feel defeated. Felt dangerous. I pulled out my personal phone, a burner I kept for emergencies, fully encrypted, and dialed a number I hadn't used in 2 years. Talk to me, a gravelly voice answered. It's Karen, I said, watching the glass building recede in the rear window. They did it. They fired the NSO. Idiots, the voice chuckled. Did you get the proof? I touched the spot on my chest where the memo was hidden. I got everything. They're going to try to fake the audit. Then we wait. The voice said, let them dig the grave. We'll just supply the headstone. I hung up. I wasn't just an unemployed single mom-to-be anymore. I was a dormant virus in their system, waiting for the execution command, and the timer was set for exactly 3 weeks. The first 48 hours of unemployment are a weird mix of panic and liberation. 1 minute you're worried about Cobra premiums and whether you can afford the good diapers. The next, you realize you don't have to listen to Brad explain blockchain incorrectly ever again. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by piles of paper. My apartment looked less like a nursery and more like a war room in a Tom Clancy novel. I had organized my evidence into timelines: the disruption, the lockout, the illegal request, the termination. It was a beautiful, devastating mosaic of incompetence. But I needed confirmation. I needed to know they were actually going through with the stupidity. Brad was dumb, but was he felony fraud dumb? I met Saul at a diner off Route 1, the kind of place that serves breakfast all day and smells like bacon grease and regret. Saul was my old mentor, a retired compliance officer who had forgotten more about DCSA regulations than Brad would ever know. He looked like a tortoise in a trench coat, wrinkled, slow-moving, and absolutely indestructible. He slid a coffee across the table to me. Decaf without asking. Good man, so Saul grunted, stabbing a sausage link. They cut you loose, operational disruption. That's cute. It's actionable, I said, sipping the brown water they called coffee. But a wrongful termination suit takes years. I don't want a settlement in 2028, Saul. I want them to burn now. Vengeance is a calorie-intensive activity for a pregnant woman. Saul noted dryly, but I get it. You think they're going to run the audit with a ghost? I know they are. Brad can't get anyone cleared in time. He has to use my credentials. He has to pretend I'm still the NSO, just teleworking or on leave but active. If he admits there's no NSO, the audit fails instantly. Automatic red flag. Saul nodded. So you need to know if your name is on the packet. Exactly. They submit the pre-audit package to the DCSA field office with my name listed as the primary POC. That's a false statement to a federal investigator. Title 18, Section 1001. 5 years in prison. Saul wiped his mouth with a paper napkin. I still have friends in the regional office. Low-level clerks who owe me favors. I can't get you the file, Karen. That's classified, but I can find out who the point of contact is. Do it, I said. Please, Saul said, leaning back. If you do this, you're burning the bridge. You'll never work for a big contractor again. They talk, you'll be the problem. I looked down at my stomach. My daughter kicked again. I thought about the world I wanted her to grow up in. A world where competent women get fired because mediocre men are inconveniently ambitious? No thanks. I don't want to work for them, Saul. I want to be the reason they have to rewrite the compliance manual. He smiled, a rare, terrifying expression. All right, give me 2 days. Those 2 days were agony. I cleaned my apartment 3 times. I rewashed all the baby clothes. I obsessively checked my bank account, watching the severance pay which they had graciously deposited sit there. It felt like hush money. On the second night, my phone buzzed, a text from Saul, just 2 words, ghost confirmed. My heart hammered. They had done it. They had submitted the packet. My name was on the documents. Brad was officially pretending I was still there, still working, still signing off on the security of the nation's secrets. I wasn't scared anymore. I was thrilled. It was the feeling you get when you're playing chess and your opponent moves their queen exactly where you wanted it. I walked over to my war wall and pinned the text printout next to Brad's memo. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for the mouse to take the cheese. Audit was in 1 week, but I couldn't just wait. I needed an inside man, someone to tell me exactly when the auditor arrived and, more importantly, when the questions started getting hard. I thought about Jason. The kid was useless, sure, but he was also terrified of authority and addicted to validation. And right now, Brad was the only authority he had. But Jason had a weakness he overshared. I found his Instagram. He had posted a story from the office. Picture of a stack of pizzas with the caption, "Late night grind, audit prep week." Brad is making us rewrite the logs lol. #defense #hustle. Rewriting the logs, I screenshotted immediately, tampering with security logs. They were digging so deep they were going to hit magma. I sent a DM to Jason, not threatening, just friendly. Hey Jason, saw the pizza. Don't let Brad work you too hard. Remember, if the timestamps don't match the server logs, auditor will notice, just looking out for you. I saw the read indicator appear instantly. Then the typing dots, then they stopped, then they started again. Karen, OMG, it's crazy here. Brad is freaking out. He's using your old login. He made IT reset the password. Is that okay? I smiled in the dim light of my kitchen. No, Jason, it's definitely not okay. But you just keep your head down and let me know when the suit from DCSA walks in. I had him. I had the confirmation. I had the witness. Now, all I had to do was let the $400 million contract walk into the room, sit down, and wait for the named security officer to show up. My due date was 2 weeks away, but I felt like I was carrying a bowling ball wrapped in barbed wire. Sleep was a memory. I spent my nights pacing the hallway, drinking herbal tea that tasted like grass clippings, visualizing the destruction of Brad's career. It was a very soothing meditation. The week of the audit, the weather in Maryland turned oppressive. The air was a wet blanket of humidity, the kind that makes your clothes stick to you the moment you step outside. It fit the mood perfectly. Inside the glass building, I knew the air conditioning would be blasting, but the sweat would be real. Jason kept singing like a canary. He didn't realize he was an informant. He just thought he was venting to a sympathetic ex-colleague. Monday, 10:14 a.m. Jason. Brad is making us scrub the visitor logs, says there are too many gaps. We're filling in names. Is John Smith too obvious? Tuesday, 2:30 p.m. Jason. They took your nameplate off the door but left it on the org chart in the conference room. Brad says if they ask, you're remote for medical reasons but available by phone. He gave them a number. It rings to his desk. I stared at that text. It rings to his desk. Brad was going to impersonate me. He wasn't just using my credentials. He was going to verify my identity over the phone if the auditor called. It was so brazen, so incredibly stupid, it was almost art. I sat down at my laptop, my personal one, and opened a new file, the Brad dossier. I uploaded the screenshots, the photos of the physical logs I had taken before I left, printout of the justification memo, the timeline of text messages. I cross-referenced everything with the NISPOM, National Industrial Security Program Operating Manual. Violation 1, unauthorized access to TS/side terminal. Violation 2, falsification of security records. Violation 3, impersonation of a named security officer. Violation 4, retaliation against a protected whistleblower. It wasn't a complaint, it was an indictment. On Wednesday, I went to the doctor. My blood pressure was up. "You need to relax, Karen," Dr. Evans said, peering at the cuff. "Whatever stress you're under, let it go." "For the baby, I am relaxing," I lied. "I'm just finishing a project. It's almost done." "Well, finish it fast, because you're dilated 2 centimeters. This baby is coming soon, 2 centimeters. The clock was ticking on my body and my revenge. I needed the audit to happen before I went into labor. If I was in a hospital bed, I couldn't drop the hammer. Thursday, the day. I woke up at 5 o'clock a.m. I showered, dressed in the most professional maternity clothes I owned, a navy blue dress that made me look like a swollen aircraft carrier, and drove to a coffee shop across the street from the office. I couldn't go in, but I could watch. I sat by the window, nursing a decaf latte. At 8:45 a.m., a black sedan pulled up. A man in a gray suit got out, carried a leather briefcase, and walked with the distinct, soulless gait of a federal auditor. I recognized him, Agent Miller. He was known for being a stickler for detail. He once flagged a facility because their shredder crosscut size was off by a millimeter. Brad was dead meat. My phone buzzed. "Jason, he's here." "Brad is sweating through his shirt. They're going into the conference room." "Brad told me to sit at your desk and look busy." I took a deep breath. This was it. $400 million contract was on the table. The future of the division hung in the balance, and the only person who could save them was sitting across the street, eating a blueberry muffin and waiting for the explosion. I opened the contact on my phone for the duty hotline. I didn't call yet. I wanted them to commit the act. I wanted the auditor to open the file, see my name, ask the question, and hear the lie. Time dragged. 9:30 a.m. 10 o'clock a.m. "Jason, they're doing the document review. Miller is asking about the discrepancy in the SF-86 dates." Brad said it was a software glitch. "Jason, Miller isn't buying it. He just asked to speak to the NSO." My thumb hovered over the screen. "Jason," Brad just picked up the phone on his desk. "He's talking to Miller?" That was it. The line was crossed. There was no going back. I finished my muffin. I wiped the crumbs from my mouth, then, instead of calling the hotline, I did something better. I called the front desk of the facility. "The main line, security," the guard answered. "Hi, this is Karen, last name. I used to work there. I believe I left a personal item in the SIF. Can you transfer me to the conference room? It's urgent." Sure, Karen, 1 sec." The guard didn't know I was fired. He just knew I was Karen. He patched me through. I waited. 1 ring, 2 rings, the speakerphone clicked on. I could hear the room tone. The tension. "Yes," Brad's voice, strained. "Hi, Brad," I said, my voice clear and loud, echoing through the conference room speaker. "It's Karen. I'm just calling to clarify something for the record. Since I was terminated 3 weeks ago and stripped of my clearance, I'm confused as to why my signature is on the documents you're currently presenting to Agent Miller." Dead silence. Absolute, vacuum-sealed silence. "Who is this?" Agent Miller's voice cut through the static. "This is the former named security officer, Agent Miller," I said, sweet as poisoned honey. "And I'm currently sitting across the street with a binder full of evidence proving that the man sitting across from you is committing federal fraud. Would you like me to come over?" I hung up. I watched through the window. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the blinds in the conference room snapped open. I saw a silhouette, Brad, looking out frantically. I raised my coffee cup in a toast. Then the pain hit, a sharp, tearing contraction that doubled me over. My water broke right there on the leather chair of the coffee shop. "Perfect timing, kid," I thought, gritting my teeth. "Let's go." The barista panicked. "Ma'am, oh my God, are you okay? Do you want a towel, an ambulance?" "I'm fine," I gritted out, gripping the table so hard the laminate creaked. "Just call me an Uber and maybe get a mop." The contraction rolled over me like a tidal wave. It was fitting, really. Across the street, a different kind of wave was crashing down on Brad. I imagined the scene, Agent Miller slamming the folder shut, the red stamp coming down, the immediate seizure of all classified materials. The failed designation wouldn't just be a mark on a paper. It would be a quarantine tape around the entire building. My phone blew up as I waddled/stumbled to the curb. "Jason, holy shit, Karen, what did you do?" "Miller just ordered everyone away from their terminals. He's on the phone with the FBI. Brad looks like he's having a stroke." I didn't reply. I was breathing through my nose, counting to 4, exhaling for 4. Inhale, destruction of career. Exhale, birth of child. The Uber arrived, a different one this time, thank God. "Hospital," I gasped. "Fast. If I have this baby in your Honda Civic, I'm not paying for detailing." Driver, a terrified young man named Kevin, drove like he was qualifying for Daytona. As we sped away, I looked back at the building. Flashing lights were already pulling up. Not police, Federal Protective Service. They move fast when a SIF is compromised. I arrived at the hospital fully dilated. The next 6 hours were a blur of pain, epidurals, and nurses telling me to push. But even in the haze of labor, my mind was working. I knew what would happen next. Brad would try to spin it. He'd blame me. He'd say I was a disgruntled employee sabotaging the mission. He'd try to delete the logs, but he couldn't because I had the hard copies. And Saul, push, Karen, one more, the doctor yelled. I pushed. I channeled every ounce of rage, every slight, every mommy track comment, every patronizing smile Brad had ever given me. I pushed with the force of a woman who had just nuked a $400 million revenue stream. At 4:12 p.m., my daughter was born. She screamed. It was a good, strong scream. A scream that said, I am here and I am not taking your crap. They placed her on my chest. She was tiny, messy, and perfect. I named her Maya. An hour later, as I lay in the recovery room, exhausted but euphoric, my phone rang. It wasn't Jason. It wasn't Saul. It was a number I recognized, the general counsel for the company, the big lawyer. I picked up. Hello, Miss Last Name. The voice was smooth, cultured, and terrified. This is Robert Sterling. I represent the company. We heard about the events of this morning. Events? I cooed, adjusting Maya's blanket. You mean the federal raid on your facility? We would like to discuss a settlement. A reinstatement, perhaps a misunderstanding package. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice raspy but firm. I am currently holding a newborn infant. I am also holding a dossier of evidence that I haven't even given to the Inspector General yet. I just gave the teaser to Agent Miller. If you want to talk, you can talk to my attorney. But I'm going to tell you right now, Brad is gone. The contract is gone. And if you annoy me, I will make sure the investigation expands to the other sites. Miss Last Name, please, I'm on maternity leave, Robert. I'll call you in 12 weeks, or never. I hung up. I looked down at Maya. Well, kid, I whispered. Mommy just got you a college fund or a very long legal battle. Either way, it's going to be interesting. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 9 months, I slept. But the world outside didn't sleep. While I dreamed, the gears of the federal government, slow, grinding, and merciless, began to turn. The audit failure triggered an automatic suspension of the facility's facility clearance, FCL. That meant no classified work could be done. Not just on the $400 million contract, but on any contract housed in that building. 2,000 employees were about to be locked out. Stock prices were about to plummet. And somewhere, in a dark office, Brad was likely trying to shred a hard drive that was already imaged by the FBI. I woke up the next morning to a text from Saul. It's on the news. I turned on the TV in the hospital room. Banner crawled across the bottom of CNN. Defense contractor under investigation for security fraud. Pentagon suspends operations at Maryland site. I smiled. It was the best postpartum gift I could have asked for. Recovery is strange. Your body is healing, your hormones are crashing, and you're trying to keep a tiny human alive. Usually this is a time of isolation. For me, it was the busiest time of my life. My hospital room became a command center. Nurses would come in to check my vitals and find me reviewing legal statutes on my phone while breastfeeding. Honey, you need to rest, one nurse said, looking at the CNN chyron that was still looping the story about the defense fraud scandal. I am resting, I said. Watching Rome burn is very relaxing. 3 days later, I was discharged. I went home to my apartment, which now felt different. It wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. Subpoena arrived a week later. 2 men in dark suits knocked on my door. They weren't aggressive. They were polite, almost deferential. They knew who I was the whistle. Miss Last Name, we have a subpoena for your testimony regarding the investigation into company name, the taller agent said. He handed me the envelope like it was a fragile antique. I expected this, I said, balancing Meyer on my hip. Do you need the binder now or later? Agent cracked a smile. Later, ma'am, during the deposition, but off the record, that phone call to the conference room, legendary, I am to please, I called Saul, I got the paper. Good, Saul said. Now you need a lawyer, not a strip mall lawyer. A shark, I know a guy. Former JAG, specializes in quitam cases. He eats guys like Sterling for breakfast. His name was David. He met me in my living room, wearing a suit that cost more than my car. He listened to my story, looked at my evidence, and didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he sat back and whistled. Karen, he said, this isn't just wrongful termination. This is a False Claims Act case. If we prove they knowingly defrauded the government, which, thanks to Brad's memo, the government can recover 3 times the damages. And as the whistleblower, you're entitled to a percentage of that recovery. I don't care about the money, I said. Okay, I care a little about the money. Diapers are expensive, but I want Brad explicitly named. I want his clearance revoked permanently. Oh, Brad is done, David laughed. Brad is radioactive. The company has already fired him. They're trying to pin it all on him as a rogue actor. Our job is to show that the culture allowed him to exist, that HR knew, that the executives looked the other way. Sheila, I said. Sheila and HR knew. She sat in the meeting. And Sheila goes down too. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions. I sat in a conference room with Meyer in a stroller next to me, facing a phalanx of company lawyers. They looked tired. I looked like a mom who hadn't slept in a month, which meant I had nothing left to lose. They tried to discredit me. They asked about my hormonal state. They asked if I was emotional during the termination. I was very emotional, I said into the record, staring at Sterling. I was terrified that my country's secrets were in the hands of idiots. That tends to make me emotional. They showed me the logs, they showed me the fake signatures. Brad had literally scanned my old signature from a PDF and pasted it onto the new documents. It was so lazy it was insulting. Is this your signature? The prosecutor asked. It is a digital copy of my signature, I corrected. The metadata will show it was applied at a time when I was physically located at a Bye Bye Baby store, purchasing a breast pump. Unless I have telekinetic powers, I did not sign that. The prosecutor smiled. The company lawyers slumped. It was a bloodbath, but the sweetest moment wasn't in the courtroom. It was a text from Jason, who had somehow survived the purge because he was too low level to matter. Jason, dude, they just escorted Sheila out. She was crying. Also, they took the coffee machine from the break room. Budget cuts. We're drinking tap water. I looked at Maya, who was sleeping peacefully. Tap water, I whispered. Justice tastes like tap water. The settlement offer came 6 weeks into the investigation. It was a number with 6 zeros. They want to settle the wrongful termination and the retaliation suit, David told me over the phone. They're offering $1.2 million. Standard NDA. No admission of wrongdoing. I sat on my balcony, watching the autumn leaves fall. Maya was doing tummy time on a blanket, grunting with effort. $1.2 million is a lot of money, I said. It is. It secures Maya's future. But no admission of wrongdoing? That means they get to say it was just a misunderstanding. That means Brad gets to quietly retire instead of being blacklisted. That's usually how these things work, Karen. Not this time, I said. Reject it. Karen, reject it. David, tell them I want a public apology. I want a statement admitting that they violated NISPM standards, and I want my clearance reinstated and flagged as unjustly revoked in DIS. I don't want their money if it buys their silence. David sighed. You're a difficult client, you know that? I'm a named security officer. Details matter. We went back to war. The company bled. The government suspended their ability to bid on new contracts for 18 months. That was the death knell. Competitors started circling like sharks, poaching the talent that hadn't been fired. The stock price dropped 40%. Finally, they broke. It was a Tuesday. Sterling called David. They capitulated. They would issue the statement. They would correct my record. And they would pay $2.5 million, part settlement, part whistleblower award. I signed the papers on my kitchen table with a spit-up cloth over my shoulder. But the real victory came in the mail. A letter from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. Dear Miss Last Name, based on the findings of the investigation, your eligibility for top secret/PSI access has been fully restored. The adverse information entered by company name has been expunged. I held the paper. It was just a piece of paper, but it was my reputation. It was my integrity. They tried to steal it, to smudge it with their grease, but I had scrubbed it clean. I thought I would feel relief. Instead, I felt finished. I looked at the badge I had mailed back to them. I realized I didn't want it back. I didn't want to go back to the windowless box. I didn't want to work for people who viewed security as a hurdle rather than a duty. I picked up my phone and called Saul. It's done, I said. They settled. Congratulations, millionaire, Saul rasped. Buying a yacht? No, I'm thinking of starting a business. Oh, insulting, I said, looking at the piles of regulations I had memorized. There are a lot of nervous whistleblowers out there who don't know how to document a file. And there are a lot of companies who need to know what happens if they try to screw over a pregnant lady. Karen's compliance and revenge? Saul laughed, something like that, but with better coffee. I hung up. I looked at Maya. She rolled over for the first time, looking surprised at her own strength. Yeah, I told her. It's surprising what you can do when you have to. 6 months later, I walked into a coffee shop in downtown Bethesda. I wasn't wearing maternity clothes anymore. I was wearing a tailored suit, sharp enough to cut glass. Maya was with a nanny, a very expensive, very qualified nanny who I had background checked back to the Stone Age. I ordered a latte, full calf. I needed the energy. My phone rang. It was a new client, a senior engineer at an aerospace firm who was being pressured to sign off on faulty wing struts. Don't sign anything, I told him, cradling the phone. Start a log, date, time, who was in the room. If they speak to you in the hallway, send an email summarizing the conversation immediately. Per our discussion, copy your personal email blind. I gave him the playbook, the Karen protocol. As I walked out with my coffee, I passed a newsstand. The business section had a small blurb, redacted Defense Corp acquired by competitor at fire sale price. The article mentioned operational failures and security compliance issues. It didn't mention me. It didn't have to. I knew. I walked to my car, a new Volvo, safest on the road. As I unlocked it, I saw a familiar face. It was Brad. He was coming out of a staffing agency across the street. He looked smaller. The suit was ill-fitting. The fake tan was gone, replaced by a pallor of desperation. He wasn't the master of the universe anymore. He was just a guy with a flagged security file who couldn't get a job guarding a mall kiosk. He saw me. He stopped. For a second, I thought he might yell, might come over and blame me for ruining his life. I just stared at him. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I looked at him with the same detached, clinical scrutiny I used to use on a non-compliant SF-86 form. I looked at him like he was a typo. He looked away first. He hurried down the street, head down, disappearing into the crowd of commuters. I got into my car, I checked my mirror, I checked my blind spots. I drove home to my daughter. The $400 million contract was gone. The company was gutted. The bad guys lost. And me? I was just getting started. I pulled into my driveway. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the house that compliance built. I took a sip of my coffee. It didn't taste like stale office brew, it tasted like freedom. I opened my laptop. I had 3 new inquiries. Subject, retaliation for safety report. Subject, HR ignoring harassment. Subject, can you help me document fraud? I cracked my knuckles. All right, I said to the empty room. Let's burn it down. Some people confuse access with ownership. They thought they could erase her from the system and still use her credentials like a keycard that never expires. But security doesn't work that way, especially not when it's federal. Karen didn't shout, didn't beg, didn't warn. She just let the system collapse under the weight of their arrogance. Actions have clearance levels, too, and theirs just got revoked. Thanks for sticking around to the end. See you in the next one.